Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Making KM Clickable, Powering Great Enterprise Search with KM. My name is Madison Dronsky, and I will be your moderator. I work in our knowledge management practice here at Enterprise Knowledge, and I'm excited to be hosting today's session. Before I hand the mic over to Zach and Joe, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about this presentation and the GoToWebinar platform. Please note that all participant lines have been muted, but we would still love to hear from you during today's session. If you have a question for our speakers, please feel free to send it through the chat tab on the GoToWebinar control panel, or by tweeting us at EK Consulting using the hashtag ClickableKM. We'll be answering questions at the end of the session, but if we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up afterwards. Also, today's webinar will be available on demand within 24 hours after the live session via our website. We will send an email with the link following the conclusion of the webinar. Please feel free to share this link with anyone you think would be interested. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce today's speaker, Zach Wahl and Joe Hilger. Both are eager to share how KM enables advanced enterprise search.
Excellent. Thanks, Madison, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Zach. Here with me is Joe, and we're really looking forward to getting started with this. By way of background, I've been doing knowledge management consulting for over 20 years. Joe is an expert in advanced enterprise search, and
I've been doing that for almost 20 years.
I thought it was closer to 30.
No.
And so as we come together on this topic, it's actually kind of a joint area of passion. And to see how these two distinct but critically important fields are coming together is really exciting for us at this point. So what we really want to focus on is this idea of starting a conversation. As Madison said, please tweet at us. Use the hashtag ClickableKM. That's one of the ways that we can get you all potentially asking some questions, and we can continue the conversation online. What do you agree with? What do you like? What do you want to challenge regarding what we're going to say over the next hour or so? We really invite you to join that conversation. I'll begin by saying this. Knowledge management as a field has been around for a really long time, and it is in the midst of a resurgence. There is a lot of energy and a lot of interest within the field of knowledge management at this point. We're seeing organizations asking the question of, are they doing it well? What is the cost of their inaction? What are they missing? We're seeing that come up more and more. The awareness is there in a way that it hasn't been for a while. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that more and more organizations are seeing knowledge management as the feeder or the foundation to more advanced capabilities like enterprise search, like artificial intelligence, the gateway to knowledge graphs and ontologies as well, as we've talked about in the past.
Yeah, and Zach, I would add to this. We now have the technology platforms. Obviously, technology does not drive knowledge management, but it helps enable it. And we really now have platforms and tools that are mature enough so that those designs that we've always wanted to put in place can really happen.
But we go back to the core challenge here, and it's been in one way or another the same one for over 20 years now that I've seen, which is that knowledge management initiatives are not seen as business critical. They are not enough seen as the sort of thing that the business will fight for. When budgets get tight, when organizations start feeling constricted by the economy or by other external factors, it is too easy for KM efforts to get cut. And I think one of the major reasons for that is that it's not visible enough. The business users don't see the value of KM enough. And so if we move forward here, we see a lot of the words that I've heard over the course of my career. KM's too expensive. What are we getting out of this? Oh, is this really business critical? What's the value? Show me the ROI. And too frequently, those messages and those data points can't be provided clearly enough. And so joining this, we also see how people tend to talk about search. It's too hard. Why can't it just work like Google? So many organizations are dealing with this frustration that search is the thing they know they need, but that they can't get to work properly.
Yeah, I've worked on close to 100 search projects, and in almost every single one of them, these are the questions I hear. Why can't it be Google? Why does it have to be so hard? We can't be successful because we can't tag our content. It's just not possible. And the reality is, with the right KM foundations that we're going to talk about next, and then with the right approach to displaying and presenting search, you can make a lot of progress and actually have people who see search as a destination and not means to an end or a problem.
So here's the thesis statement for the hour. Good KM will feed enterprise search, will make it more powerful, will make it more viable, will allow your end users to benefit from it better in a more direct fashion and more quickly. At the same time, enterprise search will harness that kind of back-end knowledge management stuff that isn't always as visible as it should be. So we serve two purposes here. We are making KM efforts that are critical to the organization more readily visible to the end users. We are proving why KM matters, while at the same time enhancing search and helping the enterprise realize one of its most critical goals, which is to improve findability and discoverability and really the process improvements that come with good search. So with that, let's talk about how. Over the next several slides, we'll break down some of the core foundational elements of good knowledge management practice. And a lot of these have one thing in common. It is that in and of themselves, they're simply not largely visible to the end user. There is value to them. Of course there is, or we wouldn't be recommending them. But a lot of times, they're not something that becomes immediately apparent to the end user. In fact, in some cases, they cost the user some upfront time. They require a new change in behavior. They require that the user do something different, which is always uncomfortable. And so, again, the key here is that these are all feeders to good search. They accomplish the immediate KM value, but they become more apparent and more visible by feeding search. And before we move forward, I'll just tell you a little bit of an anecdote. We came in to assess an organization's knowledge management plans a couple years ago. They had defined a 3-year roadmap to transform the organization to be mature in knowledge management. It wasn't until year 2 where the business user would receive any positive impact, any process improvement. So they were effectively asking their end users to trust them that all of the change they were asking the user to do, all of the additional work they were asking the user to do would be valuable, but they wouldn't get any proof of that until the 2nd year. Needless to say, that was a project that was floundering until we defined for them some very early proof points, celebratable moments that were clickable, that were visible to the end user. And so these things can be small. They don't have to be huge. It can be, in this case, minor enhancements to search that then prove out to the end user that the change that you're asking them to do, the additional KM effort that you're asking them to put in, will have an immediate value and impact to them. If we do this right, within months, there are positive changes. There's better customer satisfaction, better employee satisfaction, less time looking for answers, waiting for answers, looking for the right person, more time acting on good, complete information. And that's where we'll go with each of these points. So the first one is really about content audit and cleanup. And for the organizations that have already been through a little bit of this is one of the earliest killers that will make people hate knowledge management. If you front load too much of this work, it is hugely time consuming if done poorly, and on a content piece by content piece basis just doesn't add enough initial value in and of itself. But if you don't do it, then enterprise search is going to return the garbage that you've got in your system. If you are indexing the wrong content, the old ugly content, and all of a sudden enhance your search, you are effectively shining a light on your old ugly content. What we tend to find is that for most large organizations, 4 out of 5 of their documents, 4 out of 5 of their pieces of content actually shouldn't be indexed by search because they're old, they're obsolete, they're duplicate or near duplicate. And so improving your search without cleaning up the content in the back end will really simply just gum up your search works and shine a light on your poor content management.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this is, it's one thing when you search on Google and you get 10 versions of the same result from different websites, and you start to say, well, which one am I okay with? That's acceptable in Google land and in that broader spectrum. But when you're doing a search within your own company, within your own organization, the expectation is you're going to get the right answer back that's proven and validated. And when you get 6 versions of the same document, and by the way, 1 or 2 of them may actually have old guidance, for example, for a policy, that's a huge problem. And search isn't going to magically fix that, though as we move on, I am going to talk about some technologies associated with search that can make this cleanup easier.
Perfect. So let's move on to content types. Content types are often misunderstood by organizations. Organizations tend to try to oversimplify this and describe them as effectively content entry templates. And though that's a part of it, it's not all of the story. So first, let's spend a minute talking about what a content type is. A content type defines the different types of stuff you have within your organization, the different types of knowledge and information and data. And for each category of said stuff, defines not just the template for it, not just the format for how it should be captured and displayed, but also defines 2 other broad components that are really necessary for good content display and management. The first is governance. How tightly should that type of content be managed? How tightly should it be reviewed or approved? Having different types of governance for different types of content mean that you can protect your most sacred data while being a little looser with more social or more informal types of information. So in the long run, this greatly simplifies your overall content governance model while providing additional granularity to it. The other big key to a content type is to define how it is tagged. And that is getting into taxonomy, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But defining more granularity around how different types of content are tagged means, too, that they can be surfaced in different ways. The questions that you want answered regarding a policy are different than the questions that you want answered regarding an expert that would be returned in your search. And so creating that level of granularity is critical to the management of your content while also having huge value to search.
Yeah, as you'll see when we move on to some of the search building blocks, the ability to present content in a way that's meaningful and to start treating search results not as a string that you found within a piece of text, but to understand what it is someone's looking at is critical. Content types enable that, and we'll show that in a little bit and make it more clear.
Joe's also going to introduce the concept of search hit types in a couple minutes, and content types directly fuel hit types. The idea here is that we don't want our search results to just be a bunch of links. That is so last decade. What we want our search results to be are interactive, actionable results that a user can do something without ever leaving that screen. Remember, that search result screen is just an impediment to the user accomplishing the actions that they want to take. And so as much as possible, we want to build interactivity, action-based designs or hit types into those screens. And content types are a major feeder to enabling that. Next, let's talk about one of my favorite topics, taxonomy design, categorization, how we are describing the different types of stuff that we have within the system. I have been designing taxonomies for organizations for decades, and there are similarities to how we've done it, but it's also vastly changed. As technology has improved, the way that we architect taxonomies are much more, as we refer to it, deconstructed. Instead of 1 or 2 big unwieldy multi-hierarchical taxonomies, we instead have multiple taxonomies, each of which is flatter and simpler. What that allows us to do is translate to attributes within search results. Amazon is the classic example of this. That left rail, when you searched on a TV, you don't want to buy every TV under the sun. You want to buy the TV of a particular brand in a particular price range from a particular maker with a particular feature. Each of those is an example of an attribute. Each is powered by its own taxonomy, and that is the nature of a deconstructed taxonomy design. But here's the trick. Within your enterprise, talking about taxonomy is one of the easiest and fastest ways to get people running from the room. It is not an exciting topic, and too frequently when you ask your executives for funding regarding taxonomy design, they're going to say, well, won't search just do this? Or do we really have to invest this amount into it? Or, oh, maybe I can spare a day or two's worth of funding. None of that is going to get you where you need to be in order to define a true enterprise design that will ensure that all of your content is both findable and discoverable, relatable, and tied together in such a way that your different systems are actually cooperating with one another to help the end user find the stuff they're looking for. Talking about taxonomy for the sake of taxonomy, talking about categorization for the sake of categorization is the easiest way to not get funding for your taxonomy design project. But talking about taxonomy design for purposes of improving, enhancing, and powering search will get the right people's attention, and at the end of the day is the punchline. Good taxonomy fuels findability and discoverability through your search.
You know, and this is so true. I think the punchline is the real important statement here. In two recent clients, we spent a ton of time doing the taxonomy, and they worked through it. They worked with us on it. But then once we were done it, we embedded it into the search. And all of a sudden, a bunch of those people that took part in the taxonomy design sessions went, oh, this is why we did this. Oh, wow, this changes everything. It really, truly makes it actionable. This is why when we talk about making KM clickable, that's making KM clickable.
Awesome. So let's move on to the next most boring topic in knowledge management, and that is governance. Now, there's different types of governance. We can talk about content governance, effectively regarding the information that exists within the enterprise. We can talk about system governance, governing the means by which your different technologies evolve over time and the designs within them. We can also talk about taxonomy governance, managing the ways that those taxonomies, those hierarchical structures, those lists get managed and get evolved over time. Governance is absolutely critical to any enterprise. Whether you list it as knowledge management or not, it needs to be a foundational activity. This is how you protect the organization from risk. It is how you ensure the right people get access to the right information. It is how you ensure that the right information survives within your enterprise and continues to get better, while the wrong information, that old, obsolete information that I mentioned earlier, gets archived or gets dispositioned in some other way. So good governance, regardless of whether it's content or system or taxonomy governance, will manage the roles and responsibilities. Who is allowed to do what? The policies and procedures. How is an action decided upon? How is it made? Who needs to be informed through the process? Now, I want to warn you here. Too many organizations do one of two things. One, they make this way overly complex governance design and then fail to instantiate it within their technologies, meaning that somebody has to pull down from the shelf the big, thick, dusty, wordy governance plan in order to understand how things should be done. That will never stick within the organization. Organizations also make a second mistake. They assume that one size fits all for governance. They use a standard boilerplate governance plan that maybe was used for a different organization or was supplied by a contractor that doesn't really know you. And they end up in a situation where they didn't consider their own specific practices. And so they get a governance plan that doesn't work for them, worked for somebody else. That too won't stick. Now, the reason this all translates to search is where we began. The same idea. If you make it easier to find content without proper governance, you will be helping your users find the wrong content. I remember early in my career, I was working with an organization and we put a new enterprise search tool in place. In the early days of enterprise search, everybody was just impressed we could get the thing to run. The day that it launched, and launched successfully, our client came screaming into the room, "Turn it off, turn it off." Well, search had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It indexed all of the information in their various repositories, including a list of all the executive salaries within the company that had been improperly placed in an insecure file on one of these indexed systems. Search did exactly what it was supposed to do. Content governance had failed the organization. And by the way, that was an unpleasant day in my career.
Putting in all these search systems, that happens almost every time. There's always a document that shows up and someone goes, "Why is that visible?" And everyone runs around in a panic, and all of a sudden you find, well, that's been open on a shared drive for years, right? So search can expose this. Governance is just critical.
So lastly, let's talk about tacit knowledge capture. Tacit knowledge capture is another one of these things. It's such a trick. It is so critical to an organization to take the stuff that's in people's heads, people's experiential knowledge, the stuff that they've learned, the stuff that they've figured out, the stuff that they brought with them that you don't want them to take with them when they leave. That needs to be captured. But that often becomes an afterthought for an organization. It is oftentimes time-consuming and oftentimes the thing that business users push back on, saying, "Not one more thing, I'm already too busy." But good enterprise search will integrate an organization's and individuals' tacit knowledge. Good enterprise search won't just return the files and the documents. It will also return the ideas, the conversations, the discussions that are happening through tacit knowledge capture mechanisms like threaded discussions and communities of practice. A great enterprise search will integrate different types of stuff, your files, your people, your communities of practice, all into the result set in order that we really shine a great and positive light on that tacit knowledge sharing that is and should be happening within an organization. In this case, if you integrate your tacit knowledge systems, your collaborative systems into enterprise search, you're creating a positive feedback mechanism. More people see that these conversations are happening. They find one that helps them. As a result, they're more active in contributing to them and getting involved, thereby creating more tacit knowledge capture. We call this a self-feeding beast in the best possible way.
And if not done right, it can be the opposite. I'll never forget, Zach and I were actually working with a customer a couple of years ago, and they were trying to find out why no one would contribute to their communities. And we met with a senior manager there who was very well respected, and we did our interview. So why is it you're not using the community? And she looked at us, she said, "Well, when I put something in there and I can't find my own stuff, there's no way I'm going to bother doing it, because if I can't find my stuff, no one else is going to find it. That's a waste of time." That's the downside of not making things searchable.
There's one last key here that I want to share, and that's about leveraging tacit knowledge capture and enterprise search to connect people to people. If done properly, search isn't just going to help you find pieces of information. It's not just going to help you find your organization's stuff. It's not just going to help you find that tacit knowledge we were just talking about. It will also help you find experts or people in your own cohort within an organization. I am so proud. One of our clients is the National Park Service, and I love telling the story of the early days of a project we did with the National Park Service, where there were these two experts in 18th century stonemasonry, and they didn't know that each other existed because they were on other sides of the country working in separate parks. They found each other through the communities of practice that were surfaced through the new search system that we put in place. They made a connection. And the comment that one of them made was, "I thought I was alone all these years. I'm not alone. Here's somebody that I can learn from and collaborate with." Great enterprise search will introduce mechanisms where global organizations help people form new connections. You find a piece of information, you discover additional pieces of information, you also discover a person, an expert, a mentor or mentee that will help you be more effective.
Great. So let's move on and talk about how taking all these good KM practices can be pulled together so that we can start building a great search experience. So when I talk about search, I always begin with, and I'm going to read this, I promise not to read anything else from the slides, but the best search experiences connect people to information. That's the, I'm searching for a piece of information and I find it. Information to people. Help me find the information someone else is doing. If someone's writing about 18th century stonemasonry, wouldn't it be nice to find out who that was, understand that relationship, find those experts? And lastly, people to people. Once you know who that is, isn't it wonderful when you can go into a search and say, who's the expert in my company or my organization on this topic, and actually get a result? So let's talk about how we do that. And as we go from here, we're going to say, now we have our KM foundations in place, and we're going to look at 4 different methods for improving the search experience. Action-oriented search, those rich search results you're used to in Google and other tools that actually don't just help you find a piece of content, they actually help you take action on what you need to do. And I'm going to go into more depth on that. Faceting, that Amazon-like search experience driven by taxonomies that's really so critical to allowing people to find what they want among the massive information that most organizations have. We're going to talk a little bit more about machine learning. I know that's interesting and kind of cool these days. I want to explain when and where to use it and where you can be successful with it to really enhance search. And lastly, we have really, and this is newer, but we have done so much now with knowledge graphs, and we're seeing the difference it can make in search. So once you have the basics in place on KM and you start putting these additional features in place, knowledge graphs become that next answer of how it's going to work. So let's dive into some of these. Talked about action-oriented search. I always think of there was a big marketing push for a while that said, let's turn search into find. And I have to tell you, I thought it was just one of the worst ideas, because when people are searching, they're not searching to find a document. That's not really what they're trying to accomplish. They're searching because they have a task to complete, and that the information they need to get that task done, they don't have. So they're already annoyed and frustrated. And so what we're saying is, let's give them a search experience that helps them complete the task they're trying to do, right? The other thing about it is, they need to get the information they need so that they can make a decision. A lot of people call this information sent. There is no worse experience than doing a search, getting back 20 or 30 links, and having to dive into each different link and go, yep, this isn't it. Nope, that's not it. Nope, that's not it, right? That's frustrating. And frankly, that's when people start to give up and hate your search. Lastly, let's not make them take multiple clicks. We all talk about the pain of having to click multiple times to find what you want. That's just not what people are looking for. So let's take examples of this, and we're going to look at what Google does, because they were one of the first to jump out in this space. And if, for example, I go search for flights from Washington, D.C. to Phoenix, Arizona, instead of getting back a list of airlines and sites that I can go to, what I get back is flights, times, the chance to actually go make a choice right there. I don't have to leave my search experience to be able to get my job done. Think about how helpful that is when you start doing searches that make that sense. Let's take another example, also from Google. Not only do I fly a lot for travel, I also go out to dinner when I'm on travel. And when I'm doing that, what am I doing? So I'm looking for a restaurant. Right away, the search, that what we'll call a hit type, that action-oriented result type, needs to help me get my job done. If it's a restaurant, I want to know what's nearby, what's it like, how expensive is it, and how's the food, right? And what you'll see that Google gives you, actually, they give you a map with push pins, but beneath that, they give you a list of some of the closest restaurants, and you see a picture of the restaurant, often the inside of it, so it gives you a sense of where you're headed. Dollar signs for price, food type, and some ratings and stars, as well as status of open or closed, right? This is all that I need to make a decision. Again, in the old days, I would have gotten a list of links to websites, and I could have gone website by website to decide who I wanted to go to. This actually changes the discussion when I'm actually looking at a list of restaurants and I can see right away what I want. For me, when I travel, I don't want to go to McDonald's because I've had a long day. I probably also don't want to go to that 4-star or $4 sign restaurant because my customers probably don't want to pay for it. So these dollar signs mean a lot to me because it helps me know how I can make a good choice for both my customer and for myself without having to do a lot of research. So let me do one more internal example. We talked about the idea of finding people, right? Well, wouldn't it be nice when I find a person, I don't want to link to some web page about them or some blurb or maybe even their phone book. I want to know more about them. So we talked about content types. It's this idea of pulling information together and collecting information that makes it manageable. So in this case, this was an organization we worked with who was global, very widely dispersed, but did have a headquarters where a lot of people worked, and needed to know not just where people were located, but what they did and who they reported to. So as we talked about this, look at the search result we put together. We have the picture of the employee, right? So now I know who this is. If I see them in the hallway, I can go, oh, we were talking, because often you don't know. I know their time frame. This is fun because as we talked about what was important to know about a person we were searching for, someone said, well, I don't want to bother someone in Europe at 4 p.m. here in DC. So wouldn't it be nice to know where they are and what time it was? And then, of course, I want to know their role, their contact information, and where they're located, right? This one search result here, designed in this fashion, changes the way I do stuff. So you hear a lot of talk about the magic search engines and AI and machine learning about the order of stuff. The reality is one of the most important things you can do to fix search is to take those content types, right? To take those things that you now understand and present results that help you get the answers you want from those things, just like what you see Google and here in one of our internal designs we did. Anything to add, Zach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the other big key here is really around the idea of intuiting what you want your users to do. I think that the restaurant example, the flight example is great, but recognize that most organizations aren't going to be serving up restaurant recommendations to their internal users. So every example that Joe gave here can translate into an action internal to your organization, an action for your knowledge holders and end users. One of the biggest keys is to prioritize which actions your end users are struggling with most. Identify what their most burning needs are. Doing 1 or 2 of these at a time is a really great approach. You don't need a big bang where you're building 20 different hit types at once. On the contrary, building 1 or 2 in gives the end users the context of what is a hit type and why does it matter, and will then open up the floodgates. They will then start asking you for additional hit types, additional interactions that they're seeking within these systems.
Yeah, Zach, that's a great point. One of the things you want to have happen is throughout search, people want to see consistent change and improvement. And it's always nice to have a new hit type shows up and something you can brag about. Typically, in most of my customers, people have lost faith in search. It doesn't come back with one new search launch, right? It comes back with a search launch and then quarterly or periodically adding new features like a new hit type that allows you to start to see change and, wow, this is different, and it becomes exciting.
So Joe describes these as celebratable moments, and I've co-opted that phrase because I really like it. The idea here is really where we began. Don't show nothing for a year and then show a lot. Use an agile approach. Show a few things. Get your users' feedback. Get them talking about this stuff, buzzing about it, clamoring for more, and then set up an iterative schedule to add more. Again, the beauty is, just like with KM, search doesn't have to happen all at once. all of the things that we talked about early on for knowledge management, all of the features Joe's now talking about for search can all be done iteratively. They can feed on each other to build over time.
Okay. So that's step one. Now, we talked about the importance of taxonomies and how they help fuel search. You can't underestimate this. This whole idea of faceted navigation is critical to solving the search relevancy problem. I can't tell you how many times I've come into customers and they've said, I just need you to fix relevancy. It's all in the wrong order. Right, well, let's step back and talk about what relevancy is and also how people search and why faceted search changes the game and actually helps solve that problem. The first thing is when we look at relevancy, search engines do relevancy. It's really actually kind of a dumb scenario. What they do is they look for the number of times the term you entered occurs in a document, count it up and give you points. Well, you get more points if it's in the title, less points if it's in the body, right? And then also they'll say, oh, if it's near the front or near the back, I give it more points, right? So it's all saying, well, because this word that you typed in exists in this document, that must tell me it should be high up top. That doesn't mean it's what you wanted. Frankly, it's a mathematical calculation and not really something that says, I understand what you want. Proper relevancy comes from understanding what a person wants, right? So what faceting allows us to do is it allows us to ask the next question, right? And I always give this kind of generic example, but personal to me. I grew up in Philadelphia, where I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan.
Boo.
I went to Boston College, where our football team is the Screaming Eagles, Golden Eagles. I love hiking, and I'm a nature fan. So if I were to go online and search for eagles, I could get results of any type. And that cool relevancy calculation is going to say, well, how many times does the word eagles fit in this document, right? What faceting allows me to do is say, oh, I'm interested in sports. So I click that facet. Bang, I get rid of all the stuff that doesn't matter. College sports. Bang, now I can find my college football team's success or failures, more recently failures these days, but still working it. But faceting allows us to ask questions about what did you mean by that one word search you entered so that I can better serve results, so that we can start to solve that relevancy problem of getting the best results in the top 3 or 4 search results.
Perfect. So let's hit this from a user-centered perspective as well. What we know through our own investigations is that less than 1% of all search actions include an end user clicking to the second page of search results. So as Joe is talking about search weighting, you've effectively got 10 shots at getting the user the thing that they're really looking for or clamoring for is going to help them the most. Even with really well-tuned search, that sometimes, frankly, often is not going to happen. But users are much more likely to explore search results when facets exist. And so in these cases, the goal is really to prioritize those facets, those attributes that will allow the user to intuitively, naturally, and quickly click in order to see those results filtered, to see something that's more targeted to them. And if they are rewarded with more targeting after one click, they are more likely to click again. So we are rewarding the user for interacting with our search by showing them more targeted results.
Excellent. So now, having just talked about the user, we're going to throw the user out for a second and talk about machine learning. How do we get smarter and make search better? And one of the best examples of this, and one that really works, has to do with auto tagging. So years ago, we would start and say, oh, just go into your content management system and create your content types, and everyone manually tag your content. And that would work okay, but not great. Now, with content seemingly doubling every year, that doesn't work at all. So how do we manage all of this massive amounts of content and tag it in a way so that information is findable and reusable and our faceted navigation can work? Well, auto tagging is a great tool for that. And you'll see here an example of a piece of text I have, the Joe Hilger bio. And if my auto tagging tool has my taxonomy built into it, it can start to go through and look for mentions of things in my taxonomy. And it can start to say, oh, I found this here. This is a great tag. I should add this to the content automatically. And oh, that tag aligns with one of my facets, so now I can use it to drive faceting, right? So auto tagging becomes a way to solve the problem way back early on where people said, my search would only work if everyone would tag their content. Well, everyone won't tag their content. The goal is to automate as much of it as possible and bring it in here. Now, having said that, the example I'm giving you looks real simple because if I want the tag of taxonomies, the word taxonomies is there. That's great, except our content isn't always that meaningful. What's happened though over time as technologies have advanced, these auto tagging tools will start to look at the corpus of content, right? The whole collection of the content that's being indexed and that they're trying to tag and say, wow, every time or in most times when I find the word taxonomy, I also see this other word. So that gives me a clue that in future run-throughs, I will see, when I see that other word, it might be a taxonomy tag, so it can make it smarter, right? So machine learning is a great way over time to get tagging to where you can exceed what even a regular end user can do. Let's move on to knowledge graphs. So once you have, so now we've got all the basics in place. We've got our KM organized, we've got hit types showing our content types, we've got faceted search, we're able to tag it. Now we're going to get into some of the cool stuff. Knowledge graphs allow us, well, knowledge graphs are what's powering Google search these days. It's driving a lot of what Google's doing. It powers the experience you have in Google Home and Alexa. This is the tool people are using to better answer the search problem because it provides context. So with knowledge graphs, we start to think of things as people, places, and things, not strings or pieces of text. We also capture information in a way that better powers natural language search, right? Knowledge graphs typically store things in graph databases, which are called triple stores. Triple stores store information in the form of subject, predicate, object. Doesn't that sound like the way we speak? We always have this grand vision of can we merge structured and unstructured information? Well, with knowledge graphs, since they're pointing to things and relating things, that's very doable. So I can have this report that's based on a data set and say this report and this data set are related together because the knowledge graph allows that.
Yeah, so remember what I said about content types. Content types equate to different types of stuff. And so a great example of this is identifying different content types for different elements of structured and unstructured information, as well as your people, your experts, your social content versus your formalized content. All of this is about aggregating different types of information from different systems to be visualized together, but in different ways that will allow the user to act as they want.
And lastly, pulling all of this together, your search is never in one system. I had a consulting firm we were working with, and they needed to search information from Salesforce, their CRM, right? They needed information from their time and billing system to find out who worked on which projects. They wanted information from SharePoint because that's where all the deliverables were. And oh, by the way, we had another repository of kind of our standards and templates that we want to use, et cetera. So that all this information, how do you pull it together and relate it in a meaningful way? Well, why not use a tool that's designed to pull together information and relate it in a meaningful way? That's the aggregation capability of a knowledge graph. So let's talk about what this starts to look like. We've got our KM in place. We've built on KM to add and start to build out a more powerful search experience. So I'm going to give you a couple examples and talk about what those might look like. But before I do that, we're going to talk about the value of advanced search.
Yeah, well, let's just summarize this really quickly. Too frequently, when somebody's trying to sell a search project, they're talking about the outcomes, the points on the left. Well, it's going to help you find your stuff better. It's going to create more organizational awareness. It's going to speed the availability of information, the findability and discoverability of information. All of that's great. but it is not how you sell search. It's not how you should be talking about it. The stuff on the right is where we are. We're talking about better customer satisfaction, better employee satisfaction, better learning, stronger and faster upskilling of new employees, all because of the outcomes on the left. And so as you're talking about search, as you're trying to justify it for your organization, the true outcome, the real message needs to be about what it's going to do for the organization. At the end of the day, good search, advanced search will result in very clear, hard ROI for the organization.
Yeah. So now let's go look at some sample search results, right? Here's the first example talking about, I'm looking for an expert in neurology, and this was actually work we did with a multinational pharma company. And they said, well, how do I find that right person? And look at this search result. So we've got a person, we've got their department they work in, their corporate ID, which apparently does matter, and 5 different ways to contact and communicate with them. So this search isn't just helping you find someone. We're creating behaviors within the organization that they wanted. We're incenting the idea that people will talk to each other through Yammer because we want more of that casual conversation, because that's something we can collect and search and redisplay. We want to encourage people to use Skype as opposed to calling each other to create a more personal experience across the environment. So all of this, what you see here, isn't just a way to help people find what they want, but search can become a way to incent or suggest behaviors across an organization. Let's take another example. And this is fun, so I want to tell you the story. When we go to client sites, we often do our search workshop, and part of it is helping understand what's working and not working in the search experience. So we have these hour-and-a-half-long group sessions or focus group sessions where we start to help people understand what's not working and how they can fix the problem. So we showed up at this customer. They have a brand new headquarters. It's gorgeous, cutting edge, cool looking, everything's great about it. And first kickoff goes well. The first focus group goes great. We're going to a new conference room for the next one. Hour-and-a-half-long focus group. We're all going to be really into it and solving search. And we walk in, the conference room has no chairs. Hour-and-a-half session. Not only does it have no chairs, it has those, it's cool looking, by the way. It's a really neat conference room. But it has like those long step things that I guess people sit on, but there is no back. So we're going to force people to sit in the room for an hour and a half and talk and do that in the conference room. And it was actually a great kind of trigger to say, well, let's talk about this. You've got this brand new headquarters. Is conference room a problem? Absolutely. What do you wish you knew about a conference room? I wish I knew when it was available so I could book it. That's that action, right? I wish I knew what it looked like and what amenities it had and how many people sat there. And of course, kind of biased by this focus group, how many chairs does it have in it, right? Tell me right now whether I can use this. So all the information I need is right there to help me find what I want. Simple, content type, exposed as a hit type or rich search result that allows me to take action. The last example is something I'm doing on top of a knowledge graph. And while this, you'll see it starts to look different, but this is fun. This is a customer we had that did a lot of big, heavy research projects. And as part of it, there was a woman by the name of Josephine Buck who was not only one of the biggest contributors and knowledge people within the organization, she authored a lot of content, but was also interviewed for a lot of content. So she was really influential. And what we realized as we were putting this together, that recognizing the difference between Josephine Buck as the person, i.e. someone mentioned within a document, and Josephine Buck, the author of a document, was really important, because as we start to look at this, as I search for what are the topics of documents with Josephine Buck in it, I want to know if she's quoted, it's possible that document quotes her for one topic and there's other topics discussed that aren't relevant. But if she's the author of it, I'm pretty certain she's an expert in it, right? That really helps me understand it. So what you start to see with knowledge graphs are things like charts and graphs. And then you start to see us saying, what's the context? Is this someone as a person? Is this an author, right? I now understand of things not as a just piece of text, but I understand who and what they are. And that really starts to change the game and bring search to the next level.
Perfect. So let's wrap up before we hit a couple questions with a little bit on how to get started, because I think for too many organizations, search feels big and scary and daunting as to where one would begin. So the first piece of this is to go back to where we started this presentation. Those foundational non-clickable KM elements are feeders to good search. So begin by planning, how do you design your taxonomy? How do you begin coming up with an iterative content cleanup and content typing strategy? Now, for all of that, here's the key. Sometimes saying we're going to design a taxonomy is not the right way to kick off a taxonomy design project. How about we are going to fix search within your organization? And by the way, one of the ways that we need to start that is with taxonomy. So the first message here is that those foundational KM elements are critical and are exciting in order to feed search. Now, the other piece, and I hope that you've gotten this at this point, search and KM both have something very, very important in common. They are all about the users. You can't do these things in a vacuum. We talk about a hybrid methodology where we look at your stuff, we look at your existing systems. That's fine and good. But don't leave the end users out of your KM and search initiatives. If you are not designing with them in the room, your project will fail. It is unfortunately as simple as that.
And when you try to fix search without asking people what they're searching for or what they want to find and how they want to use it, you're not engaging them. They're not going to feel part of the solution and they will not adopt it.
So with that, Madison, have any questions come in?
Yeah, no, we have one here. Do enterprise search projects need to start with all organizational knowledge and systems?
The short answer is no, absolutely not. A lot of times, and this actually just hits on what I just said, a lot of times organizations find search to be too big and too daunting and too scary. So think agile and think small. Search prototyping is a great way to prove out some of these features, to show the value of some of those foundational KM initiatives, to get your users involved. You can run search pilots or prototypes for a specific group against a specific system. As long as you have a view to where you want to end up, as long as you have a strategy to how you want to expand, search can start small and simple.
And I would actually, not only would I say it can, I would encourage that it does. If you think about getting search results from 10 different repositories and having to figure out which one gets prioritized, how to mix it together, it gets very hard. Start with one or two, or maybe three, if you're aggressive, and get it out there. Now, the other thing about this is as long as people know what's in the search or what's behind it, they're okay with taking time, right? So if you say we're searching these 3 repositories and people know that, then they're going to be okay with starting with 3 if it's a great experience, and then you slowly add on more piece by piece in a structured fashion so you don't break search along the way.
We have another question. Can you clarify action versus knowledge application, and if the term is interoperable for use with AI?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things there. First and foremost, the way that we think about this is knowledge, content, data. That's all the stuff that I was referring to as stuff. A good, complete enterprise search will surface your knowledge and your content and your data. A good enterprise search will also translate all of that in an actionable format. And that was the example that Joe was giving as hit types. All of that can be done before you start talking about artificial intelligence. AI is a term that is getting thrown around a ton these days, but it's not until you really get into the machine learning, the ontologies, and the knowledge graphs, as Joe was talking about, where we start really deeply talking about AI.
Yeah, and actually it was purposeful that we talked about action-oriented search result types first, taxonomies or faceting second, machine learning third, and knowledge graphs fourth. That's how you build it. And if you try to jump to knowledge graphs up front, it's going to be a long road to hoe because you don't have the basics in place to be successful.
And even moreover on that, Joe, there's even stuff that we can do here before we really even get IT involved. I really like the way that you talk about search weighting, faceting to a certain extent. I mean, there is work that can be done leveraging KM efforts to improve search that are highly non-technical.
Yeah, we had a customer who was struggling with search, and the first thing we did was put in a search governance team, and we started getting metrics of what people were doing. And with some simple changes, doing things like best bets, improving the way we name some of our content in the titles, without IT, they took what they had as the statistic was 12% of the searches had someone select one of the first 3 items as a result. 2.5 weeks later, after these changes had been made, that number went up to over 33%. People clicked one of the first 3 search results. That's the kind of change you can have even before taking a deep dive on technology.
Now, don't get us wrong, we love working with IT, and that is often a critical element of these projects, but a lot of times it's not a luxury that an organization has. And so we like talking about that non-IT solution to search as well, because a lot of times that's the best an organization can do, and it's a fine place to get started.
And next question we have, how can you prove the ROI of search?
This is a great one. So the long and the short of it is that there are many ways to do this, but we always like to start with efficiency, time wasted versus time saved. And so one of my favorite statistics, what we've found is that 30 to 40% of a knowledge worker's time is spent waiting for information, looking for information, or worse yet, recreating information that exists within the enterprise, but of which that user was unaware. So if you consider the time spent in that 30 to 40%, equating to the cost that an organization is paying for that 30 to 40% for all of their people, this literally translates to millions upon millions of dollars. Now, you can also look at this from a call center perspective. One of the biggest keys and one of the places where search can be most visible for an organization is in searches against knowledge bases where call agents are answering the phone. There is a cost to every second that is spent with somebody on the phone. There's a cost in customer satisfaction for the actual customer. There is a cost in salary for the number of call agents that that organization needs to staff in order to keep call times down. Speeding search, getting people to answers more quickly, directly translates into cost savings. Now, we at EK have defined a whole set of calculators that help to define ROI against knowledge management, against enterprise search, against the various systems. But that's just a little bit of a taste to it.
You know, and one great thing is to get a strong ROI story, often it's about what problem are you solving. So when we talk to our customers about what is it you're trying to search for and why are you searching for it, as we learn that, it becomes an easy way to say, hey, because if I solve this thing, those become our hit types, right? But it also becomes the reason for doing work, and it becomes very obvious of this particular problem is saving time here, or it's actually allowing our partners to do something more efficiently. You get to tie to a better ROI when you can be more specific about what people are searching for. Search as a generic answer is not going to be a great ROI story.
So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you everyone on the line who has joined us. The webinar recording will be available again within 24 hours on our EK website. For anyone who has asked a question that we haven't been able to get to, we apologize, but we will certainly follow up with you after this webinar. So thank you everyone. We hope you have a great day.